story about a long-standing love affair between human beings and the food we eat. We come into this world hardwired to love our food. Who can forget the taste of popsicles in the backyard in the summertime? Who can forget the taste of that soup that was made by someone who cared when it started to get cold outside? Food is so much more than just fuel. Through food, we learn about where we come from, who we are, and in some ways, who we want to be. But the story that I'm going to tell you today, like many love stories, is also a story of tragedy and betrayal. And I saw that tragedy and betrayal up close about a year ago when I found myself watching an ad on television for a popular antacid. And in this ad, a mother, just like me, was at a children's birthday party, and she was going to take a bite out of her burger when all of a sudden, the burger bit her back. Quite literally, this burger started to eat this poor woman's face. And the byline for the ad was this: when your favorite food starts to fight you, fight back fast by taking the antacid. Now, this ad horrified me, not only because one of the first things I learned in medical school was that pain is a protective sensation. It helps our bodies to avoid things that are going to cause us harm. And this ad was suggesting we should medicate that protective sensation away so that we can continue consuming the foods that are hurting us. But the other reason why this ad horrified me was because of what it suggested about the state of our modern day relationship with food. What was once a loving, intimate relationship had somehow turned into the War of the Roses. You may remember this film about a handsome young couple who seemed to have it all, and then they got very busy, they sort of lost the intimacy, and they started fighting. And then the fighting escalated, and they ended up investing so much time, energy, so many of their resources in that war that they lost everything. They lost their friends, they lost their jobs. At the end of the movie, they lost their lives. And it struck me that there were some pretty scary parallels between the dysfunctional relationship in this movie and our modern day dysfunctional relationship with food. We used to know our food intimately. Even if we didn't grow it ourselves, we probably knew the person who did grow it, or at least knew where it came from. We spent time with our food. We cooked it with care. We served it with pride around a table to our families. We tried not to waste our food. Remember those days? And in return, our food loved us back. It kept us healthy. It kept us feeling good about ourselves. It helped our children to grow and develop and thrive. But then we did something that our food could never forgive us for. We got really busy, and we started outsourcing the intimacy with our food. We started paying strangers somewhere far away from us to grow, process, and package our foods. We allowed our food to be stripped of its nutrients so that it would last longer on a grocery store shelf. And then we allowed our food to be pumped full of synthetic nutrients, colors, flavors, and more fat, sugar, and salt than we were ever meant to consume. We allowed our food to be caged and drugged and force-fed until its breasts got so big it couldn't make it to the water trough to get a drink. We allowed our food basically to be pimped out and sold for a profit. Now, if you were food, wouldn't you want a divorce? So is it any wonder then that our food is hurting us? Is it any wonder that we are in the midst of an epidemic of obesity that has never before been seen in the history of humankind? It's an epidemic that threatens to bankrupt our nation and leave our children with a shorter life expectancy than their parents. But instead of trying to repair that relationship with food, we just keep investing more time, energy, and resources in our war on food. And it's a targeted war. We spent 10 years or more trying everything in our power to eliminate fat from our diet. And now we're hearing more and more about how carbohydrates are the real enemy, and we need to eliminate those even if it means that we end up living on bacon and eggs. And one of the side effects of this targeted war on food is that we've all become much more educated about what's in our food. But by seeing food as a collection of nutrients, something that was once so beautiful somehow became less beautiful. We looked at a strawberry and we saw fiber and vitamin C, but we saw some sugar there too, and we kind of made a value judgment based on what we had been told we should be consuming more of, or what we had been told we should be eliminating from our diets. I'm not pointing fingers here. I thought about food this way for many years, and I intimately know the thought process that I used to go through when I would routinely outsource my own family's eating. It was the end of a long day, I was tired after work, the children were hungry, and the takeout alternatives just seemed endless. They were so easy, they were so quick and inexpensive, and they carried with them this illusion of happiness. But then something happened a few years ago that changed my relationship with food, that really repaired my relationship with food. This is my middle son, Misha, when he was 2 years old. And I give this picture to my students as part of a role play exercise. In the exercise, the tables are turned, they get to be the physicians, and I get to be the worried mother. It's not a huge character leap. I have a lot of practice in this role. But I ask them to tell me what they see, and they say, well, he looks rosy-cheeked, he looks well-fed, he's feeding himself in a developmentally appropriate way, the word butterball gets mentioned. And then I tell them that a year has passed, and I bring Misha back for his 3-year visit, and he looks like this. He was emaciated and pale. He complained of terrible tummy aches, but we couldn't figure out what was causing them. This child never stopped smiling because I think anybody who's ever dealt with sick children knows that they are the bravest patients you will ever meet. After 6 weeks of worry and sleepless nights, Misha was finally diagnosed with celiac disease, an autoimmune food allergy to the gluten found in wheat and a few other grains. And this is Misha 6 months after being on a gluten-free diet. Now, I'm not going to tell you today that going gluten-free is the solution to our problems with food. I think we've seen too many times that the single nutrient solution is never a sustainable one. But what I will tell you is this. In the 24 hours following Misha's diagnosis, the 24 hours where I cried and I threw out a lot of bagels, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could either mourn the loss of those bagels for the rest of Misha's childhood, or we could blow the lid off of this thing and turn it into the biggest party our household had ever seen. I started cooking again. From somewhere in my childhood memory bank, I remembered my mother coming home from work and tossing a handful of chopped onions into some olive oil on the stove, and I started to imitate her, and an amazing thing happened. The children became interested in what was going on in the kitchen. They wanted to be part of the process of cooking real whole foods, and it amazed me that they seemed to really enjoy eating those foods. They became curious about where their foods came from, and even my pickiest eater would suddenly try things he had never been willing to taste before. We visited farmers markets and experimented with new ingredients and new flavors. I rarely followed recipes because I knew that wasn't going to be a sustainable way for me to cook in the long run. But what I found was that the more I did it, the more I cooked, the quicker it got, the easier it got, and I started to feel pretty good about what was coming out of that kitchen. The children began to look at their food differently. There were friends that suddenly came into our home for experiments with cake batters and other real food ingredients. I realized that we were eating healthier, but we were enjoying our food more than we ever had before. It certainly did require a reallocation of my time, but the upside was so great that I could never have imagined going back. As a family, we had come together around food, and we were finally loving the foods that loved us back. Now, in retrospect, this adventure really did so much more than change the way we ate. This adventure changed the question from what should we be avoiding to what do we feel like eating. And what we ended up eating was really pretty satisfying. In fact, I have an anecdote to tell you about that. My children are being raised in what you might call a multi-faith home. They celebrate the Jewish holidays, they celebrate the Hindu holidays, they go to a Catholic school. That is not the punchline. But somebody at the school asked Misha, tell me, Misha, when you're at home, does your family pray before you eat? And Misha said, we don't have to. My mom's a pretty good cook. Cooking had added so much value to our lives. I couldn't help but want to share this with others. And I thought that if I could just expose other parents to some of those fundamental principles of cooking that I had been exposed to, maybe I could help them to change the way they ate. You've got to love Stanford for thinking this is an innovative idea, but they actually supported me in the creation of a massive open online cooking course with a little bit of nutrition education sprinkled in. And the course generated a community of tens of thousands of parents who, to this day, come together to share their recipes and to share their stories of how cooking had added value to their lives. The best story that I heard was from a mother enrolled in the course who said to me, I cooked dinner 3 times last week. That's 3 times more than I've cooked in the last 6 months. I just needed a reminder. So today, I'd like to offer you a gentle reminder. If you're tired of fighting with your food, if you want to repair that relationship once and for all, I have something for you that will outdo any marriage counselor or love expert in the book. And you probably already have one in your kitchen cabinet. So instead of leaving you today with a prescription for what to eliminate or what to eat more of, I'd like to leave you with my wish for you. May the foods you eat be worthy of you, and may they be made with love. Thank you.